So today I want to talk about the kind of question that we've been conditioned culturally through our philosophies and our forms of morality. Hello, Tom. I want to talk about the kind of question that we've been conditioned to ask at moments of uncertainty, moments when we see trouble arising in the world, moments when we we feel we ought to do something. I've mentioned this a couple of times now, that there's a question percolating up in the social consciousness. And the internet is actually the mirror to our social collective consciousness. And there's a question percolating up there at the moment. What should I do? What should we do? What should we do? What should we do? What do we do now? Right. And the way that question is framed, the what do we do? What should we do? It's the should and the imperative part that I want to challenge. Because we have so many systems of shoulds and thou shalts and thou shalt nots that we've normalized the idea that there is right or only ways, there are imperative ways that we ought to act. And I want to challenge that. And I want to talk about the reframing of that question to say, what should I do? And reconsidering two considerations. The first is, what can I do? What is possible? What are the limits of my agency? Yeah. And the second one is, what am I called to do most authentically? What's the limits or the reach or the invitation of my authenticity? What's my calling? Because we're not all here to respond to something in the same way. Excuse me. And so we want to move from what should I do or what should we do as a collective to what can we do and what's possible, which is a question about our agency and our reach. And the second part of that is, what ought I to do, or what does beautiful look like to my soul? What does necessary look like to me? What does love look like to me? And that's an authenticity question. So part of that, both of those are about self-knowledge in a way. The agency question, what's possible, is about the limits of my agency. Yeah, but we can't really answer that question in an honest way, an intellectually honest way, until we have a solid grasp of reality, of what's real, what's emergent, what's actually present. Yeah. Now, therein is a big philosophical, not quagmire, but we've made it into a quagmire. Because we don't even have convergent understanding or convergent language. We don't have convergent understanding of reality collectively, and we don't have convergent language to have that conversation in, so that we can work out together, individually or collectively, what is real, and therefore what the limits of our agency are. So there's a whole quagmire or a whole project there. And the related project is, what are we authentically called to do? Yeah. So if Tom or Jesus can tell me if that framing makes sense. Yeah. I'm hoping it does. So the momentum, Erin's joined us as well. Erin, we're talking about a wonderful topic today. We're talking about this question that's coming up through our collective consciousness. It's living in us. It's knocking on the doors of our hearts. It's making us even more anxious than the circumstances out there are making us. And the question is, what should I do? What should we do? What can I do? What do we do? What are we supposed to do now? And it's good in a sense, because it means there's an inflection point in our consciousness and the collective consciousness that is rubbing up against this habit that we have of incessantly diagnosing, analyzing, talking, dissecting, there's only so much of that we can do that is useful. And it's important, of course, to have that analysis and that critical understanding, because we need to understand the reality that we're dealing with. But that conversation is becoming ideologically captured, politically captured, fractured, and it's not actually helping us. And part of the challenge with that question is most of even just the way we ask that question, what should I do? What should we do? That should implies a psychological conditioning that that makes us subject to forms of morality, forms of thou shalt, or what you should do, or what you ought to do, um, collective ethical probity, and all the rest of it. And all of those shoulds belong to stories and frameworks that are currently unraveling and collapsing, right? Which is making us all anxious and uncertain, which is driving the question, what should I do? And what we're here to talk about today is a reframing, perhaps, away from the should towards this idea of what can I do, what is possible. And that's a question of agency. And that implies we need to have an understanding of what is real, what is true, what is happening. So what reality looks like. We have to make contact with reality. And secondly, we have to make contact with our own authenticity, because it's not just the what should I do question or what can I do question, what's possible question is what am I called to do most authentically? How am I called to follow the way? So that's what you've joined in on here. And if we can forget the collective for a moment, and we'll keep flipping back to the collective to make sure this is still tracking, because one of my arguments is that whatever works for us individually has to work collectively. Otherwise, we're not making contact with reality. Yeah. Whatever we're suggesting here has to be a workable solution in some sense for everyone. What makes that individual and personal is our current limits of agency. That's how we orient and locate ourselves in this problem. And secondly, our individual authentic truth, our self-knowledge, our self-awareness. And these two things start off a journey for the prospective seeker or the artist or the burgeoning writer or philosopher. Anyone that's called to act now or to do something, the advice that I'm certainly broadcasting here or transmitting, the sanity that I'm transmitting is you got to start with yourself. Even if you care for something out in the world, especially if you care for something out in the world, like a project or a relationship or a community or the children at large, or just the prospects of humanity, those things will be solved by shared dreams, better ideas, better invitations, better conversations. And we can become those invitations. We can become the torchbearers of those conversations. We can become the invitational forms of leadership that we would long to see in the world. Yeah. So there's these two wonderful journeys we can now begin. The one journey asks us to explore and expand our own agency, and the other one asks us to explore and expand our own self-knowledge. And this is where philosophy and the prevailing wisdoms that we have at the moment, hey, Lunar Sage is here as well, this is where these things run out. Yeah. And we now need to consider new forms of self-inquiry. Now, old ones already exist. There's a lot of spiritual traditions. There's a lot of kind of self-help literature that points to these things, but nothing quite so clearly as that. Nothing quite so simply as that. So I invite the people here, there's a small handful of folks, but they're some of the regulars as well. Which one do you want to talk about first? Do you want to talk about how to grow agency and how to safeguard agency in the current moment, in our current reality? Or do you want to talk about how to plumb the depths or uncover your authenticity? In other words, that which is most personally true about yourself. It's not the measure of power and agency you have, it's your why internally that you would want to employ or deploy your agency for? And I'll let you tell me which one you'd like to talk about today. Now, sometimes I prattle on and this carries on for an hour, and I want to wrap this up probably around the 20-minute mark to keep it more digestible. So please, if you're here, Tom or Erin or the Lunar Sage, I don't know your first name, please let me know which of those two conversations we'd like to explore collectively here. Is it the how do I build and safeguard and develop my agency and my sovereignty in the world? Or is it how do I explore my own authenticity, my own why? Would love to hear about agency. Any other votes? Otherwise, I'm going to go with the Lunar Sage's conversation. Both, actually. Okay. Well, let's talk about them both a little bit. I think the personal is the most fundamental way to change. In a sense, they're both personal to us. You need to think of it like if you're on a ship making a destination or navigating a journey of discovery, trying to escape or reach a better place, the ability that you have to rig the sails and harness the wind, that's part of agency. The control and responsiveness of your rudder and your helm, yeah, the ability you have to navigate currents and avoid storms and to ride out storms, all of that, let's call that your agency. Yeah, the control, the integrity that you run that ship with, the way that you can master things that are on those decks and all the equipment and all the necessary stuff, let's call that agency. And if we are the masters of those journeys, and this little metaphor is about us reaching somewhere that we care about, that's pretty personal to us because that's a decision that we make, and that's a capacity that we're responsible for safeguarding. So that's personal too. Literally, Erin says, I'm literally just binging documentaries about the Vikings. The ships were their everything, so their agency, very much so. And it's a metaphor for a container of our life, our conscious container, our psychic container, our relationship containers. There is something about that I'm calling agency, and it's related to integrity, it's related to self-mastery, related to self-awareness, self-maintenance, etc. And there's something we want to get better at over time, right? Now, the star that we're following in the sky, the why that we're making that journey, even if it's an abstract why, I want to explore, I want to reach broader horizons, or I want to get somewhere, and I don't know where that somewhere is, but I'm looking for it, right? That's our authentic calling. That's our the star in the sky that we are following, right? I call those things like craft and calling, right? So we've spoken about them a bit, but the first person to make a vote here was said, I would love to hear about agency. Using that analogy of the ship, agency then is the ability that we have, the skill that we have, the extent of our skill, right, that we have to both rig and configure and manage and steer the ship the way that we would choose. Yeah. If you're honest with yourself, how can you do that and say, I'm doing this in the way that I would choose, if you are not clear on the what I would choose and why, right? So now we're back to the authenticity thing. So now you can see how these two are so indelibly intertwined. And I want to talk about agency very quickly because there are people on the internet, excellent guides and teachers and resources who are talking about growing agency, right? You've got to grow your agency, and you've got to, if you're high agentic and you're high consciousness, this is the way to be. And yet somewhere in that subculture is this belief that if you just high agency, it doesn't matter what's happening in the world. You just have to like look after yourself, like being in alignment with the Tao, or um, being, perfect stoicism is this. I only control what I can control. And somehow in that project, they overlook the necessity to understand and make contact with reality, right? If we cannot make contact with reality, even that project of high agency is a fallacy, right? It's a bit of a false trap. And there's ways to do that, right? So what would a ship captain do? A ship captain would not just, okay, guys, here's the model. This is how we run a perfect ship. Now we're going to make it perfectly and do it all this way. So if you're looking at the individual, you need to do an assessment, an inventory, a radically honest, raw inventory of who the crew are, right? What are the different forms of will and agency that you need to develop mastery over, right? So people call this different things. They call it internal family systems, parts work, the shadow, the inner child, the unconscious. There's lots of language for this. The way I talk about it is reasonably simple. I consider that there's 4 persona inside of ourselves, right? There's lots of ways to skin this cat. In the one sense, there's the left brain and the right brain. In the other sense, there's our higher mind and our lower functions. There's our executive function and our amygdala. There's lots of ways of skinning this cat. But the most useful way when you're thinking of agency is to think of it like this. And this is my suggestion. There are 4 persona. The one is the child, the inner child. The other one is the animal, the soft animal of the body, right? We are still this emergent product of a mind, body, soul, spirit complex, right? And a big part of that is the body and all of its forms of impulsion and agency and reactivity and desire and need. And I explained this yesterday. We think we're becoming mindful by sitting in the cinema and looking at the screen and realizing A, that it's a movie, and B, that that movie is not real and that I'm sitting here separately from that. But there's these impulses, these thoughts, these feelings, these reactionary pathways, these responses that come up in the dark, in the cinema beside us, that we're unaware of, and we imbibe them or we take them on as if they're our own thoughts, whilst vigilantly watching the cinema screen, right? Unaware that much of the influence that's occurring in the dark beside us is also not necessarily us. And there's no clear line where the self begins and ends, right? The self that we understand ourselves to be is an emergent property of that limbic system, of our biology, of our gut flora. Our gut flora is a large percentage non-human, right? And we are products of what we eat, and our gut is our interface with our physical environment. Digitally, we're constantly consuming virtual content and material that is affecting and priming and framing our consciousness, right? Our lack of awareness, all of that are things that impact our agency. And being unaware of that inventory of persona inside of us can make us susceptible to pretty much everything that we're susceptible at the moment in our default state. So we've got the child, we've got the animal, right? The soft animal of the body. We've got these 2 internal persona, these mental persona, called the protector and the judge. The protector is the one that wants to keep us safe, right? That wants to keep us from being harmed. Right? Every single creature on earth wants to avoid pain and injury and wants to seek out pleasure and wants to do those things efficiently, right? There is a sub persona of ours, the protector, that is kind of in charge of that protection function. And there's another one called the judge that wants everything to be free and to be fair, right? Now, each of those 4, the child, the animal, the protector, and the judge, have shadow expressions. And when their needs are not met, we default invariably and unconsciously at our unawares We default into their shadow expressions. You need to be quiet now, little one. No. This is not a joking time now. And this is what happens most of the time, because the uninitiated person, I'm actually going to keep talking. You go find Mama, see? The uninitiated person isn't aware that we have those 4 personas, and also isn't aware that there needs to be a coherent, contiguous, higher self that is the internal parent, the internal leader, that is holding that conversation and not letting those bits all talk at cross purposes over and across each other. Because in our shadow expressions, the child becomes the wounded child. Yeah. The animal becomes the beast, for whom its only language is excess or violence or vice, right? How many of us are all struggling with our vices these days, right? Our urges, our urgencies. Yeah. The protector becomes the critic. The critic always points finger at self and becomes critical and becomes controlling, right? It doesn't mean you're a sociopath when you behave like that. It means that what's missing is the internal parent to sit and preside over the 4 persona, to moderate and ameliorate their natural shadow impulses, right? And the judge becomes the victim, right? When I cannot keep everything fair and free, I feel disenfranchised. And in that disenfranchisement, I look who to blame, right? I look for a scapegoat, or I look for a redeemer. Yeah. And the critic says, if you didn't want this to happen to you, Rocco, you shouldn't have done blah, right? And the victim becomes entitled and says, if they didn't want me to do this, then they shouldn't have done that, right? And when we pay attention to our internal forms of conversation, I've actually got a video on YouTube about this, and I might drop a link into the into this video when I post it. But it basically explains to us, right, what each of these voices sound like, right? How they speak up constantly, all the time. How they get triggered, how they respond automatically, and it's the work, right, of a lifetime to be a parent and a healthy leader and a conscious, self-aware individual that is aware of all those 4 individual conversations. And the work alluded to in alchemy, or doing the inner work, or shadow integration, is becoming aware of such persona and guiding them, lifting up that conversation, leading that internal system back up into its exalted expression, its conscious expression, right? And it's not that this is a one and done exercise. This is a constant practice, right? And so this is where things like breath work, yoga, meditation, and many other things come into it, because that consciousness needs to become embodied, number one. And it's not just a case of you build the spear and you put it on the wall. It's something that needs to be honed and tempered and sharpened and kept ready all the time. It's an ongoing thing that you need to integrate into your life. One of the foundational necessities for actualization is integration, right? So we have to figure out ways to constantly integrate. And since agency is about making contact with reality as much as anything else, we need to admit and recognize that reality is emergent, that something is always changing. People are changing in our relationships. We are constantly changing. The moment is changing. Our environment is constantly changing, which means, excuse me, the necessity for ritual, for ceremony, for repetition, for practice is extremely important, because we need to become reinitiated into the unfolding reality of other people, of our communities, of our moment in time, etc. I hope that's making sense to everyone. So all of this talk track that I'm trying to lead here is to try and find people who are called at this moment to say, I want to do something. I want to help. I want to be of help. And I want to know that my help is helping. I want to be effective. I want to be part of the solution out in the world at the moment. And so many of you will be writers on Substack. You'll be artists, you'll be creatives, you'll be thought leaders, you'll be torchbearers, wayfinders of some persuasion, philosophers perhaps. And I just want to help such people answer the question, not just what should we do, but what can we do and what's possible? How do I build my agency so that, turning to the authenticity question, so that I can bring my gifts to the coalface of the problem, so that I can be part of the solution, so that I can bring this medicine or this gift or this invitation that I feel that I am inside myself. I can learn how to bring that out and learn how to apply that with wisdom and grace. Do we have any questions at the moment? Who have we got here? We've got Tom. I think the personal is the most fundamental way to change. Yes, but we've expanded what that field of the personal includes. Judd joined, Genevieve joined, Nancy Chapin joined, and Great Granny Giggles a lot joined. Do we have any questions? Otherwise, I'm quickly going to wrap up about a little bit about the authenticity piece, and then I'm going to close out because I've been making these videos too long. Do we have any resonance, any questions? Okay, I'm not getting anything through. So I'm just going to carry on quickly and talk about the other side of that equation. So backtracking for a moment, the question was, we're all living with a question or being nagged by a question, which has no right to go away. It's a good question. What should we do? All I'm challenging is the should part, right? And I'm saying that the should part is this vestigial bug in our software that we've inherited from all our various isms and systems of control. We are always being told that some other person out there, some leader, some father figure, some nanny state needs to tell us what we should do or what proper is. And then one of the inflection points that we're reaching collectively is that form of doing and engaging and social organization is breaking. It's unraveling because it's no longer capable of carrying us across the threshold that we are encountering, right? And we're feeling that discomfort and that dissonance consciously, unconsciously, psychically, energetically, in many, many ways, in all of our forms of social coherence, economically, all our forms of government and social organization, even in our relationships and communities. And instead of saying, what should we do? We're reframing that to say, what can I do? What's possible? That's an agency question. And we have to encounter the limits of our agency. And the one thing I want to say here is your current limits are not your permanent limitations, which means there are ways to better safeguard your agency. There are ways to become a better navigator of your little ship, to make sure that the hull, the integrity of your ship, water is not leaking in and energy is not leaking out, that you know how to harness your sails properly, that you know how to marshal and lead the crew that are part and parcel of this thing that we call a self, right? And the second part of that question is not just what should I do, but what is most beautiful to my soul? What is my authentic vocation? What is my essence? What is my quintessence? What is the North Star that is calling to me, that is beckoning me towards a broadening horizon, right? Religion is such a small framing with which to hold such an enormous conversation, right? As with many philosophies, there are different ways of isms that smuggle in new thou shalts and new limits to our agency and new limits to our possibility, because they try and make everyone homogenous and say, here is the one formula for everyone. Here is the one download of wisdom for everyone. Now, what makes them good, beneficial, or what makes them beneficial, and in quoted commas, good, is that they provide social coherence. They give us shared language, shared models, shared maps of meaning. But there's limits to those maps of meaning, and they become dated, and then they become sacred, and no one's allowed to update them and edit them, and then we get ourselves lost again, right? Your hair is beautiful, my darling. Very lovely. And now the invitation is for many of us in our projects of wanting to lead ourselves so that we can marshal our own agency, and then to lead others with these beautiful ideas and these creative forms of invitation and gifts that we represent and can represent, if we can uncover them and unpack them, is to discover that truth in ourselves, about ourselves. Yeah. And it's the work of a lifetime to make contact with your own genius. Yeah. And to deepen and nourish that relationship. And it's the kind of journey which you can only follow in the dark, right? No one can exactly tell you which way to go. All I can do is tell you how to follow the way, not which way the way is. You are the way. You will bring something special to this conversation, right? And no questions. And I'm about to wrap up now as well. So the second part of this then is, how do I deepen that authenticity? Hmm? How do I figure out what is truly me? And we think, you see, there's this wonderful paradox about being and becoming. There is a whole rich, beautiful body of wisdom in the world which says, stop striving to change or do or fix or being, just being in resonance with what is and how you are. That's the way. That's the way. That's the way. That's the way. But if we're honest with ourselves, we live with the discomfort of the status quo, and we have part of that who I am and that being inside of me is a desire to be something other, to grow in some way, to evolve in some way, to be somewhere else, for the world around me to be lighter, happier, better, kinder, more connected, right? That requires a doing. Right? So there's this wonderful tension between being and becoming, and we often wonder, and we go and subscribe to alternative philosophical and spiritual models that say, this is the right way, it's all about being, or this is the right way, it's all about self-development and becoming. And we can't quite figure out which one is it, right? Because we're torn in both of those directions at the same time. That tension, the secret aim of that tension is transformation. And it's not supposed to be A or B, it's a dance that we do. A little bit, one step of this, one step of this, one step of being, one step of becoming, one step of actualization, one step of integration, and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on. And that's the symbol of the two snakes climbing up the staff of Hermes, the caduceus, that staff with the two snakes and the wings and the pine cone on top. So that is a map for our journey of authenticity. And what that picture of Hermes' staff looks like, it's a central pillar with a pine cone on top. And the pine cone is this symbol, like a lotus flower, of this continually crowning emergence, right? It's the perennial invitation to teleological becoming, to fulfillment, right? To following our desire. And on either side of that are wings, right? So these are the two wings of the soul, we can say. And I'm saying that curiosity and self-permission are the two wings of the soul. We have to have high agency to give ourselves permission to follow our own way, to follow our own forms of curiosity, to hold the conversation of life in our way, from our stance, from our place. But then we also need to trust ourselves, and that's where the development of agency comes along. And it's not A or B. Those two projects are also intertwined, yeah? And you'll notice that the snakes don't just cross over, they keep crossing over on that staff. Every single one of those intersections represents an iterative cycle, an iterative packet of life. We are in a spiral dance with our own becoming. Yeah. We veer too far away, and then we encounter limits, and then we have to come back in again. And so the dance continues. And in some sense, the whole of humanity is undergoing one of those convergences again, because we've taken our things to two extremes. And now the limits of reality are forcing us into a kind of reckoning, a kind of convergence, a kind of pronouncement of doom or judgment, right? And I think it was Socrates who said the unexamined life is not worth living. And we love the wisdom of that, but we never get taught what to examine. And I'm saying to you, the way to discover your own authenticity is iteratively. Authenticity has to be practiced. You can't get authenticity without vulnerability. Mistakes are how we learn. Mistakes are how we learn. If you want to develop your own voice as a creative, as a writer, as a speaker, as a philosopher, you have to apprentice yourself to people who inspire you, but then you also have to apprentice yourself to your own craft and calling, right? And there is no preformed path for this. Antonio Machado said, "Waymaker, there is no way. The way is made by walking. By walking, the way is made." Yeah. We want to follow a path for the certainty of it, but if we join a path that's well worn and well signposted, you can be sure it's not your path. You can be sure it's not your path. When you become lost, when the road disappears, when things become uncertain, that's how you know you're on your own journey, right? That's how you know this is a real conversation, when you don't know what's going to occur next. And David Whyte is a poet that I follow, and I'm apprenticed to his work. And his suggestion is you have to see this all as an invitation into a conversation. And in a way, those snakes are in conversation. And in a way, those two wings are in conversation. And in a way, our agency is in constant conversation with unfolding reality. So too must be our discovery of our authenticity. It is an ongoing conversation, even though there is something drawing us on across that horizon, some dream that we want to realize in the world. Yeah. We can't get there from here. We have to stay in the conversation and meander there over time, just like that little ship's journey. I hope that's making sense. Now, I'm going to leave you with a little something, and then I truly am going to log off, even though it's 40 minutes in. If you want to hit me with any questions or comments or thumbs ups or thumbs downs or whatever the case, that will be most welcome. To leave you all today, there's a small little poem that I wrote, which is also a prayer, which is also like a kind of guiding mantra for yourself around this question of safeguarding and developing your agency and deepening your own relationship with your authenticity. And it goes like this. It's called Become. Become the shelter you were once forced to abandon as a child. Become the shelter you were once forced to abandon as a child. Become the leader you would follow out of love. Become the leader you would follow out of love. You know, when we miss things in the world and we long for them, we get taught somehow that it's because there's something lacking or missing and it's some terrible mistake. We don't realize that it's exactly an invitation for us to create that which we find missing, or for us to become that which we're longing for. Become the shelter you were once forced to abandon as a child. Become the leader you would follow out of love. Become the light that you seek, drawn to like a moth. Become the example of what you appreciate so. Become the example of what you appreciate so in others. Be the unfolding gift, not become. Be the unfolding gift that you came here to share. Become the invitation and the welcome that you were denied by life. That is what we're supposed to do with our pursuit of genius and our gifts and our energy and time in this world. We're supposed to become the example of what we appreciate so in others. We're supposed to be the unfolding gift that you came here to share. Become the invitation and the welcome that you were denied by life. Become the fulfillment of your heart's desire. Nature does not make duplicates. You are unique, and you came here with a gift, and there is a myth, there is a story that's trying to live through you. Yeah. And the fact about authenticity and about becoming is not about adding something to you that is missing. It's about cutting away everything that is not essentially you. Yeah. It's as much about disintegration. Yeah. About cutting away story and bullshit and beliefs that encumber you, that prevent you from arrival at your own simple truth. Become the fulfillment of your heart's desire. Become the realization of your dream. Become. And that ladies and gentlemen, is the end of my little talk today. 40 minutes, double what I wanted it to be, but c'est la vie. I work best with engagement, I've learned that about my authenticity. So if you're enjoying this, if you take value from this, kindly let me know. And I'll share this later. And I encourage you, if this means anything to you, if this resonates with you, if you think this is going to resonate with somebody else, this is the good news. This is the good news that we want to share. We are in such desperate need of a new dream. And that means we need dreamers, right? And that means we want messages like this to proliferate and to reach other people, because there's thousands of people right now, thousands of them. They are the new philosophers, the new thought leaders, the new writers, the new voices that we desperately, desperately need in the field right now. And their voices are all cluttered out and silenced by all the noise and the jabber and the drama, right? And it needs people like us to boost this kind of signal and attract those kind of people in, so that we can remind them to be the unfolding gift that they came here to share. Anyway, James, such a shame you arrived right at the end, but it's a worthwhile watch. It's a really worthwhile watch. Judd, thanks for your comments, mate. And I'll be back again tomorrow, more or less the same time, with some other exploration of the same theme. So have a beautiful day. Take care. Yeah, it was a good one, James. It was a cracker. See you folks next time. Thanks for coming.